right, so we're going to continue here in Chapter 1 talking about business statistics. So every chapter starts off with a case, and they give us some data, and we're going to analyze it throughout the chapter. So in this chapter, we are a ski resort, or rather, we have a ski resort, and we have surveyed 20 tweens, so ages 9 to 10 to 12 to 13, and we've asked them 4 questions. So what radio station they were listening to on their way in, rate the quality of the food, what time do they think the main dining area should close, and then how much of their own money did they spend at the lodge? So we have all of their results here, and it's just this conglomeration of results, and we need to somehow draw some conclusions, make some analysis, and draw some conclusions. So statistics is actually a methodology, a science, if you will, of extracting useful information from a data set. So we have all of this data, but now we have to be able to extract useful information. So in order to do good statistical analysis, number one, you have to find the right data. You have to find good data. And we'll talk about this more as the semester goes on. What are correct and appropriate sampling techniques? How is an appropriate way to collect data? That sort of thing. There's a lot of science that goes into collecting the data. Then we need to make sure we're using the appropriate statistical tools. So not every statistical methodology or statistical calculation is appropriate for every type of data. And we'll talk about that also as we go along. And then we also need to take this data that we have and communicate it appropriately. And this is a little bit that we talked about in the first video. We can get the numbers, but we have to then communicate that appropriately and correctly so that we're actually providing people with good information so they can make good decisions. So there's two kind of branches. There's descriptive statistics, and then there's inferential statistics. So descriptive statistics, goodness, that's a mouthful, is collecting, organizing, and then just presenting the data, not really drawing a lot of conclusions. We're just kind of collecting and organizing this raw data. Inferential statistics, which we will get into in later chapters, is really drawing conclusions about the population at large based on what this sample tells us. And so we'll talk about those again more in later chapters. So when we talk about a population is all of the items of interest. So looking back at the ski resort data that we were given, the population would be every tween in the United States, every tween in the world, every tween that goes to a ski resort, but that's our population. A sample is just a small subset of that. So oftentimes we can't ask every single tween to fill out our survey. So we're going to choose a random sample, and we'll talk again in later chapters about how to do that appropriately. But we'll choose a random sample, and then based on what this random sample tells us, we can extrapolate that to the population at large. So with the population, again, we know the parameters, but it's too expensive or it's just flat impossible to collect entire population data. So a lot of times we have to make do with a sample, but we want to make sure, and we'll talk about this again in later chapters, that our sample is a good representation of the population at large. So cross-sectional data is examining many different data points or collecting many different data points at the same point in time without regards to time. So we don't really care when this was collected. It doesn't matter if they surveyed the students or the tweens first thing in the morning or last thing in the day. So we're going to send out a survey, and as long as it's collected within a reasonable period of time, it's not time dependent. As opposed to, let's say, time series data, which is time dependent. So for example, if we are a hospital and we are monitoring patients O2 levels after surgery. Then it matters, is this O2 level 1 hour after surgery, 2 hours after surgery, 3 hours after surgery? Then we have time series data where we're examining the changes in the data over time. A lot of stock price data is time series data. We may examine how the stock price changes after a certain announcement happens or after a certain event happens. And we want to examine what does it do in the first hour after the announcement versus 5 hours after the announcement versus maybe 10 hours after the announcement. So data can come to us structured or what we call unstructured. So structured data is has, is formatted. We may have it in columns and rows and things like that. Whereas unstructured data, we kind of have to piece together. So maybe this is at the end of a survey where we have comments open and we allow people to give comments. Well, those comments are unstructured data. So we're going to have to take those unstructured comments and then try to make structured data out of that. Now, there's a lot of places that you can get really good, reliable data on the web. It's just raw data. They haven't done the analysis for us. It's just a reliable place to collect data. So you can see a few of those listed here: the Federal Reserve, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the U.S. Census. This is just raw data, but it is data that we can pull and rely on.